Communication has been at the forefront of human expansion and progression from the beginning of time, an essential component of the most mundane of daily tasks to nation-spanning wars. All forms of communication used by the human race are constantly evolving and changing, as does encryption, the act of making communication a secret, or the process of converting information or data into a code, especially to prevent unauthorized access. The Enigma machine, originally invented at the end of World War I in 1918 by Arthur Scherbius, is an excellent example of the evolution of communication and its effects. The machine was intended to replace manual encryption, which was prone to many errors and breaches in security. Mechanized encryption was far faster than the human hand, accurate, and had the capability of being sent longer distances in a reduced time. However, because of the hyperinflation and economic strife following World War I, Scherbius's invention was stalled in its mechanical debut. At the time, a single US dollar would have been equivalent to 10,000 German francs. It was impractical for the government or anyone else to spend money they didn't have on a machine that seemed better suited to a war they had just lost. To understand how the Enigma machine became an integral part of World War II, it is important to have a general understanding of the events leading up to the war that led to the use of the machine. Following the end of World War I and the signing of the Treaty of Versailles at the Paris Peace Convention on June 28 of 1919, Germany was forced to agree to severe terms of war reparations and loss of territory. Germany was barred from having an air force, forced to demilitarize the Rhineland, was required to reduce the German army to 100,000 men, and was forced to pay massive war reparations. Following the integration of the terms of the treaty, Germany was left with a weak government and an economy in shambles. Adolf Hitler, a radically patriotic former World War I soldier, furious about what he perceived to be the humiliation of his country, began to climb the ranks of government. He established a fascist dictatorship in 1933, with himself at the head, claiming that he had the solution to Germany's problems. A similar state of political and social turmoil had occurred in Italy slightly earlier. Italy had been on the winning side of World War I, but received far less territory than it had hoped. The Italian people widely felt that they had been cheated, and this growing sentiment of unrest, coupled with a poor economy and the weak leadership of Giovanni Giolitti, created the perfect socio-political scene for Benito Mussolini, a fascist politician, to enter the scene and claim he had the solution to Italy's problems. In 1922, Mussolini became the Italian prime minister and proceeded to establish himself as a fascist dictator. Hitler and Mussolini shared many of the same political sentiments, such as radical nationalism, totalitarianism, violence and militarism, and a strong sense of racial superiority. They also shared the same political enemies in Britain, France, and Russia. With the establishment of two fascist dictatorships in Italy and Germany respectively, the inciting events of World War II proceeded to take place. As the Axis war campaigns began throughout Europe, the Enigma machine was employed to encrypt important messages and ensure the security of military communications and intelligence. Invented in the wake of World War I and brought into use during the Second World War, the Enigma machine was a prime example of hundreds of years of innovation in encryption. According to the 26 factorial rule, there are 403 septillion, 291 sextillion, 461 quintillion, 126 quadrillion, 605 trillion, 635 billion, 584 million possible permutations of the alphabet. The first form of encryption to make use of these possible permutations were monoalphabetic substitution ciphers, in which a single letter would represent another throughout the encrypted message. Monoalphabetic substitution ciphers are often found in riddle books or puzzles. First used around 1500 BC and also known as the Hebrew Atlash cipher, they are identifiable by the use of frequency analysis, looking for specific patterns of the same repeating letters. THE is a common instance of this rule. The Caesar shift, invented in 58 BC, is another common type of encryption. It entails the transmission being encoded by sliding a number of spaces to the right in the alphabet, and replacing the original letter with the letter used as the cipher. For example, a Caesar D shift would designate the letter A as D, B as E, C as F, and so on. Eventually, following a conceptual leap forward, the Vigenère cipher was introduced by Blaise de Vigenère, a French cryptographer and diplomat. The Vigenère cipher adopted a polyalphabetic substitution cipher, in which the same alphabetic permutation does not apply to every letter. Rather, a keyword or phrase, for instance green, would be written above the plaintext message until the end of the transmission. For every plaintext letter, the letter of the keyword above would designate which Caesar shift would be used to encrypt. The Vigenère cipher allowed for dilution of frequency analysis, and for a long period was thought to be an uncrackable cipher. With the introduction of a new government, the Enigma machine was ultimately brought into the German Air Force beginning in 1935 and the Navy in 1942 for communications. The Air Force utilized the Wehrmacht Enigma, a machine with more rotors than was usual, while the Navy used the four-rotor model dubbed as M4, known as Triton or Shark amongst the Allied powers. The machine looked like a large typewriter, with a plugboard at the front, followed by a keyboard, a light board, the rotors, and the reflectors at the back. The system was built around the rotors, originally 3. The encryptor would type the message into a standard keyboard. Each letter of the message would be put through the rotors, bounce off the reflector, and pass through all 3 rotors again in the opposite direction. The light board would then be lit to show the encrypted message, and the first of the 3 rotors would change one position, ensuring that the second output would be different, even if the second input happened to be the same letter. Once the first rotor had cleared all of its 26 positions, the second rotor would begin to turn through its positions, followed by the third. In total, 17,576 rotations of the rotors were necessary before the pattern began to repeat. Later models added a fourth, and in the case of the Wehrmacht Enigma, a fifth and a sixth rotor. The plug board, which allowed cables to be attached that would swap up to 6 pairs of letters, also served to add to the complexity of the machine. Later models would again improve upon the design, increasing the amount of cables to 10. Amongst the encryptors working the machines, day keys would be given out in monthly codebooks. For every single message, a random order of the rotors, called a trigraph, would be chosen for the message, along with a designation of which cables would be attached. In total, the Enigma machine was capable of 10,586,916,764,424,000 different combinations. With the sheer volume of possibilities of encryptions, changing every day and different for every set of receiving and transmitting machines, the Enigma presented an immense advantage in secure communication and the transmission of data for Germany, as well as the interception of crucial Allied supplies in the Battle of the Atlantic. The Enigma machine was ultimately cracked by a joint effort between England and Poland. The 2 nations had tried in the past to decipher the Enigma machine's inner workings, but had failed without knowledge of the wirings. No major progress was made until Marian Rojewski, a Polish mathematician, was able to accurately replicate the machine itself with ciphers stolen by Hans Thilo Schmidt, a worker in the German Cipher Bureau and the brother of Rudolf Schmidt, who would go on to command the 2nd Panzer Army. Both England and Poland began to work on calculations to decipher the German code. The process was slow and only began to show progress in 1937, with the Polish development of an electromechanical process known as the bomb. The success of the Poles was followed in 1941 by the successes of the British mathematician Alan Turing and his colleagues at Bletchley Park in refining the bomb to fully decrypt the Enigma machine's process. The Enigma machine serves as a historical monument to the complexity of innovation and the evolution of communication. From the first monoalphabetic substitution ciphers to the Vigenère cipher, there was a point with each major discovery when the method was thought to have been unbreakable. At each of these points, the methodology of cryptography continued to progress, and a pattern would emerge in which the solution to the unbreakable cipher would ultimately single out flaws or weaknesses of the original encryption process, leading to the refinement of the next encryption methodology. This same process occurred in the instance of the Enigma machine, which was also believed to be unbreakable and was proven to be a defining instance in a world-changing event in both its problem and solution. Today's encryption and decryption methods, heavily aided by constantly improving technology, demonstrate the push and pull relationship in the evolution of cryptographic communication. The Enigma machine is a clear example of the continuous evolution of human communication and its impact on society and world events.